Welcome to Bruce Hurwitz Presents Meet the Experts. I'm your host, Bruce Hurwitz of Hurwitz Strategic Staffing. I hope you'll consider us for all your staffing, career counseling, and speech writing needs. I am delighted to be joined today by Scott Peloquin. We'll be discussing the ever-changing minefield of health insurance and employee benefits. Meet the Experts is sponsored by P&K CPAs. P&K is a full-service accounting firm. They provide accounting and consulting services to businesses ranging from startups to small and mid-cap companies to nonprofits, as well as high-net-worth individuals. Contact them today for a free consultation at info@pk-cpas.com or call them at 973-882-8810. They will be happy to be of service. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Bruce. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Please take a minute or two and introduce yourself to our viewers.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Scott Peloquin. I'm the CEO and founder of benefEx Benefit Consulting. We're headquartered in Florham Park, New Jersey these days. We've been in business for 21 years. So if we were actually a person, we'd be able to have a legal drink. And we're fortunate and blessed to have clients in, I want to say 38 of the 50 states.
That was actually going to be my first question for you, if you're able to work outside of New Jersey. So you anticipated. Very good. Now, there are 5 things I want to touch upon. The first is, and this goes back, you provided these questions, and everybody will see it in the write-up, but when it comes to employee benefits, I always thinking of when I was working at a small recruiting firm. The boss wanted to provide us with benefits, and he brought in a number of financial advisors, I guess would be the best way to describe them. And it was one nightmare after the other. So how can an employer tell whether their interests are aligned to those of the advisor? That the advisor isn't interested first and foremost in his wallet, but in your wallet.
Yeah, and I started to share, Bruce, and forgive me for interrupting. I'd like to be clear that I wouldn't for a moment presume to impugn the character or competence of anyone against whom we compete. And so, there certainly are no shortage of advisory firms who compete with us, who do a terrific job and whose compensation structure is built entirely on commissions or success fees, depending on the phrasing you like to use. There is a really deep-seated flaw in the distribution model for insurance and financial services generally, and that's that we as an industry tend to be paid a percentage of premiums that you pay. And so while you can certainly find an ethical, qualified, and competent benefit advisory firm who's a commission-only firm, understand that there is an inherent disconnect or there's an inherent potential for conflict when folks get paid a percentage of what they sell, as opposed to folks like us who are more fee-based in their approach. So, first and foremost, if you want to make certain your interests are aligned with your advisory firms, ask them how they're paid. We are paid as a combination of fees and commissions. We fully disclose them. It's interesting to watch some of the industry play catch up to the disclosure requirements that were passed in the waning days of the Trump administration. But we've been a full disclosure fee-based employee advisory firm for, 6 or 10 years at a minimum. But ask your advisor how they're paid, and to the extent that you're not comfortable with elements of the way they're paid, explore that with them. Is it a fixed percentage? Is the percentage negotiable? Are there any fees that are outside the percentage of premium, or do they simply get paid more when you spend more? Again, I really can't stress enough, there are no shortage of really good people in this industry who are paid exclusively by commissions or a percentage of what they sell. We just don't think that that's the best model for compensating the distribution of services. And so that's not a model that we've adopted to exclusivity.
I've always thought that the best model is one where where the advisor is paid a percentage of the gains of the client.
Yeah, that's an interesting model. If we charged on a percentage of savings, I suspect we'd actually be able to charge quite a bit more. But to my knowledge, that model does not exist in the health insurance or the employee benefit sector, but that's an interesting thought experiment for sure.
What's a fiduciary?
So a fiduciary are folks who act exclusively with the interest of the end user or the client in mind. I wouldn't for a moment to claim that we were fiduciaries. That is a much higher standard of performance. We certainly do everything we can to behave as a fiduciary behaves, or in a manner that would be consistent with fiduciary standards. But I can't legally make the claim that we act as fiduciaries. That simply wouldn't be the case.
I'm thinking of the commercials that you see on television these days for the various financial advisors. And I understand you are not a financial advisor. We're here to talk about health insurance and employee benefits.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. My academic background's in economics. And so conceptually, we'd be qualified, I suppose, to provide financial advice, at least if you're a believer in the efficient markets theory. But as a practical matter, I don't have the emotional fortitude to help people with their money. We could certainly help people with their benefits.
Okay. Now, how can employers determine which benefits plan to offer their employees?
Yeah, so here, some of this, Bruce, depends on the size of the employer, but we would suggest asking them, right? You'd be stunned at the number of employers who have no idea why it is that they're offering what they're offering. In fact, when we do strategic planning, the most common response that we get to the question, why? Well, we're with Horizon Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Why? The most common response is a variant of, we're not really sure of why we do things the way we do them, but we're damn sure we've done it this way for a long time. And so, our view is that most employers are acting in the best interest of their employees, despite what the media would have you believe. We don't necessarily view that as an adversarial relationship, but we do find that those lines of communication between employers and employees aren't quite as unencumbered as perhaps they ought to be to serve the interests of both better.
One day, my boss asked me to find out if employees were happy with our health insurance provider, which was at the time Oxford.
Oh, yeah.
I left the office. I took maybe 20 steps into the lobby. There was a colleague there, and I said, I have a quick question for you. Are you happy with our health insurance plan? She said, yeah. I then went into the men's room, came out a minute and a half later. The boss was in the lobby, furious. He said to me, what in the world have you been doing? My phone is ringing off the hook. Everybody thinks we're going to take away their health insurance. And I said, I asked so-and-so what she thought of Oxford. That's all I did. So I learned that health insurance is very emotional. People act emotionally, not rationally. So how do you, this isn't one of the questions I was planning on going over, but how do you deal with that emotional component if you can save everybody money? The first thing they're going to say is, but is my doctor in the plan?
Yeah. So it's funny, the story you relate is one we've heard before, where employers with the best of intentions went out and asked, and I was being a little facetious earlier when I said, we'll just go out and ask them. tragically, you as an employer really can't ask your employees a question that's that direct, for two reasons. You discovered one of them, which is that you ignite the emotional powder keg of, oh no, please don't change anything. We I think are preconditioned as a species to presume that change is bad, right? So you found that one by asking the question of somebody directly, and a fairly innocuous question. It set off a chain reaction of emotional responses that I suspect you'd prefer not to have set off. The reality, though, and there's something called surveyor's bias, right? Even in outsourced survey situations, respondents to surveys have a propensity to filter their responses through the prism of what they believe the questionnaire wants to hear. And so when we say ask your employees, what we really mean is figure out a disinterested third-party way to do so. And to more directly respond to your question, hey, how is it that you can garner information that can be on a very emotional topic in a way that's usable? There are, to the extent that you carefully structure responses that permit a really free and open exchange of ideas, you are more likely to get unvarnished feedback if you filter that feedback through a disinterested third party, right? And now, in the interest of full disclosure, employer survey or employee survey work is work that we do, and I don't want any component of this to sound like a commercial, but our experience has been that people are much more likely to tell us the truth than they are to tell you as an employer the truth, because they spend less time filtering their response and more time just responding.
Now, in my work as a recruiter, I found that health insurance is the #1 benefit people are looking for.
Yep.
And the majority of employers, small businesses, only provide insurance for the employee, not for the employee's family, that the employee would have to purchase themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So when claims come in, all right, the employer is only paying the claim for the employee, not for the employee's spouse and children, correct?
In what you're describing, yes, although with
Right.
current labor conditions, we're seeing that that's less true than was the case a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah, now things are beginning to change because of COVID. Because of COVID, in that the available quality candidates aren't there. It's a seller's market, in that you're selling yourself, and there are, if I had to think if it's a seller's market or a buyer's market, it's a seller's market, and therefore benefits are becoming more important. Now, you always want to be able to save your employees money, but how do you do that when employers are, I'll ask it differently. How do employers avoid paying retail for their employees' claims?
Yeah, well, so you alluded to one of them a moment ago, right? So the most common way to avoid paying retail, and candidly an increasingly less effective way. But you alluded earlier to somebody who wanted to make sure that their doctor was quote unquote in a network. Networks were built on the assumption that you as an insurer could drive additional volume to a service provider's practice in exchange for a discount. And back in the early days of managed care, mid to late 80s, it wasn't terribly uncommon for a good network, or a network that was seen as a good network, to have a third or so of the providers in a given area. In that environment where you had a third or so of the market share of doctors or hospitals or laboratories, it was awfully easy as an insurer to fulfill the promise of driving additional volume to that service provider's practice. Well, these days, a good network has at least 90% of the providers within the network, right? And so in that environment, there's no scenario under which you can actually drive volume to the practice. So on the question of how do you avoid paying retail, it used to be as simple as if a doctor wants $200 and an insurance company negotiates a 40% discount, everybody wins, right? I mean, it's the medical services equivalent of the entertainment book, right? Your restaurant's in the book, your doctor's in the plan. The downside of that is that medical services aren't divorced from the laws of economics. And so if you are providing a 40% discount, right, but you really need that 100% of purported retail, the easiest thing in the world to do is to double your pricing and then give a 50% discount, right? And so in effect, our doctors and our hospitals and our laboratories have all gotten to the point where they're a lot like a camera store on 42nd Street. They're in their 30th year of their going out of business sale, right? And so people see the discounts that are provided. You know, they'll say, hey, our retail price was 200, but because you're an Oxford patient, you're only going to pay 120. That same doctor is taking Medicare patients all day, every day for $60 a head. And they're thrilled with that because even though doctors complain about the Medicare reimbursement system, Medicare reimbursements are predicated on doctors having a certain profit margin. It may not be the margin that the doctor or the hospital wants, but there's a margin in there nonetheless. And so a somewhat effective strategy of not paying retail, have insurance so that you'll at least get the discount, even if it's fallacious or inflated. But the much better strategy for making sure you're not paying retail, let Medicare do your negotiating for you, even if you're not part of the Medicare system. Avoid situations where you have an insurance network at all. There's another model that's fast becoming a dominant player called reference-based pricing. And reference-based pricing takes the math that I've described, where a doctor purports that they have a $200 retail charge and then graciously agrees to a 40% discount. So you've got your bill for 120, and it says, hey doc, if you're taking 60 from Medicare patients, would you take 78 from us? In other words, a margin over that reference point. And as long as the insurers pay them quickly and at a rate that's greater than Medicare, we've seen that be far and away the most effective to make sure you're not paying retail. The beauty of that model is twofold. One is the price points in terms of premium are lower for the employer. And because most employers share those premiums with their employees, either as a fixed dollar amount or on a percentage basis, that drives employee savings at the same time. The other nice thing about it is that most insurance plans these days are based on either some combination of deductible or co-insurance as opposed to copays, which had been the dominant force throughout the 80s and the 90s. If you're paying a percentage of a claim and that claim is actually discounted over retail, your net out-of-pocket expense at that juncture is lower as well. So for the employees, it's a 3-for-1 win in our view. It eliminates the restrictive nature of the doctors' networks. It discounts the actual claim to a level that's just marginally above what Medicare pays. And that discounting gets passed through to you in the form of both lower premiums and a lower percentage of your cost share. It's really the best of all possible worlds.
Interesting. Now, one thing I do not understand is how a situation can come about where an employer is paying for their competitors' claims. Can you explain that and how it can be avoided and at the same time save employees money?
Yeah, so this one's a little bit more nuanced, but there are several markets that are available in most states for employers to purchase through. Markets, to be clear, is not the same thing as insurance companies. Insurance companies participate in markets, right? So using New Jersey as an example, because you and I are both located in New Jersey, the overwhelming majority of small employers in New Jersey, and to define that, it means 50 or fewer employees. The overwhelming majority of those folks have been convinced that there are 4 insurers in the entire market. Not the case at all, right? There are 4 dominant players in a market in New Jersey, but there are multiple markets in New Jersey. So On the question at hand, which is to say, how is it that you avoid paying for your competitors' claims? The dominant market in New Jersey is called the statutory market. That's a market that's regulated entirely by the state laws in New Jersey. You're not required to participate in that market. You can opt out into several other markets. That's a more technical discussion. But the statutory market, though, is defined by rating characteristics that require insurers who play in that space to base their rates on two factors and two factors only. And those are, what's the zip code or what's the county in which the employer is located? And the other one is the employee's age. So think about this. I was having this conversation with my 16-year-old daughter who's taking driver's ed. God help us. And one of the things that her teacher asked is, hey, does anybody know why boys pay more for car insurance than girls do? Every girl's hand in the classroom shot up to hear my daughter's retelling. And they said, well, 17-year-old boys are idiots. And whether or not that's true, I can't say in toto, but I can say that when I was 17, I was an idiot. My own 17-year-old son, who I love dearly, his frontal cortex.
My favorite T-shirt of all time says, "Be nice to your kids. They choose your nursing home."
Yeah, there's something to that logic too. But interestingly, in the car insurance market, which we don't participate in at all, it was readily apparent that gender played a difference in rating, because for better or worse, from an actuarially defensible standpoint, 17-year-old boys have proven that they drive less responsibly than 17-year-old girls. So I'll make a value judgment on that, but the stats back that up. Mm-hmm. Well, in a similar manner, let's go back to the question. How do you avoid paying for your competitors' claims or your neighbor's claims? Well, if you're in a rating system that treats 30-year-old males the same as 30-year-old females, how is that fair? Right? Despite the advances in medical technology, 31-year-old males are not capable of childbirth. There is an enormous actuarial difference between a young man and a young woman based purely on the maternity risk. And yet our political class, and I don't have a partisan dog in this fight. I don't even remember the last time I voted for a winning political candidate. But our political class has convinced us that it is somehow discriminatory to take gender differences into account when we're establishing our rates, which I don't understand. It's widely known that women tend to take better physical care of themselves than men. Because of that, they go to the doctor more, and because of that, they cost more to insure at younger ages, maternity risks notwithstanding. That continues to happen until about age 50 or so, when the male's propensity to ignore their health needs finally catches up with them, and we suffer more heart attacks and strokes and cancers and whatnot, right? So the relevance of this is that if you participate exclusively in the statutory market, a rating difference that's as simple as gender, which isn't permitted to be taken into account, means that, if you're a computer company with, 16, 22-year-old single males, you are paying the same exact pricing as though you're, to use an example, a daycare facility where you've got 16, 20-something females. It's crazy. And so we prefer to have employers opt out of the statutory market. You're not required to buy your product through New Jersey's statutory market, staying with New Jersey as the example. ERISA offers an exemption. In the ERISA market, you are permitted to take factors into account. Gender is only one factor. Age differences are a factor that while they're permitted to be taken into account in the statutory market, the effect of age on morbidity or your risk, there's a pronounced difference between what the statutory market permits as rate spreads and what they don't. Where you're located, what your plan designs are. Even your health status, Bruce, is permitted to be taken into account. And so, to use one more car insurance analogy, in the old days, when I first started buying car insurance, everybody in New Jersey was in New Jersey's assigned risk pool. There weren't any willing providers. New Jersey's statutory market, which is where your competitors are buying, effectively has become one big assigned cesspool.
What is ERISA?
So the cynic would say ERISA is an acronym that stands for every ridiculous idea since Adam. But ERISA actually stands for the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which was something that the government passed, federal government passed back in 1974 in order to preclude employers from discriminating against their lower paid employees in deference to their higher paid employees. There are some who believe that ERISA was a direct response, interestingly, of medical practices who would buy insurance or provide benefits, not necessarily buy insurance, but provide benefits for the 4 doctors who owned the practice through one corporation and establish a different corporation where their administrators and their nursing staff work so they could exclude them from benefits. So that was widely seen at the governmental level to have been an abuse of the tax code. And so ERISA was crafted largely to protect lower paid employees from being underserved by the benefits that their employers were using to their advantage through the tax code. So to simplify it, and forgive me, I feel like I'm off on a tangent. The statutory market, the state of New Jersey plays puppet master. They write the rules, they pull the strings. In the ERISA market, the federal government writes the rules and pulls the puppet strings. And there are 2 other markets, the PEO market and the MEWA market, that are hybrids between those models. But in effect, if we were in a courtroom and you and I were attorneys, or if we were about to go to trial, choosing between ERISA and the statutory market is very similar to what attorneys do when they try to venue shop. They look for a favorable judge to hear their case. And one of the things that a good advisory firm will do is that they will look at the 4 available judges from whom to choose, whether they're MEWA or PEO or ERISA or statutory, and they'll figure out where your case would get the best hearing.
One last, not question, but request. And we're just about out of time. What is a PMT sort?
Yeah, so a PMT sort, PMT is an acronym as well. This one is not of the government's creation. This is a benefEx creation. PMT stands for premium, MOOP, and total. MOOP itself is an acronym, so forgive me for embedding an acronym within an acronym. MOOP stands for maximum out of pocket. And so we have undertaken a job that we view almost the way the Mercedes people viewed not enforcing their crumple zone patent. Right? There was a great commercial way back when where Mercedes says, at Mercedes-Benz, we think there are some things that are too important not to share. We believe, Bruce, that the PMT sort is the benefEx version of that promise. The overwhelming majority of people, and you alluded to this in your opening comments, who buy health insurance do so emotionally rather than logically. And a PMT sort takes a really emotional process and distills it into a formula that a layman can use to pick the health plan that they're going to enroll in. It adds the premium to the MOOP or the maximum out of pocket. It creates a total. It sorts those out, and it lets people who know nothing, and importantly, people who want to know nothing about health insurance, know exactly where the most efficient purchase point is. And that's something that will be available on our website shortly and will be available to the general public, irrespective of whether you retain us.
Well, that's a good segue for me to share your contact information. And I will ask you the final question I ask all guests. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you wish I had asked? And if I had asked, what would you have said?
That is a good question, and one for which I'm unprepared. So we will often get asked from an archetype standpoint, who do we want to work with, right? And first and foremost, we'd like to work with open-minded people who are willing to reconsider some of their assumptions, just as we've been forced to reconsider some of ours in the 35-year journey we've taken in the industry. Our favorite people with whom to interact are open-minded entrepreneurs, open-minded CEOs, and open-minded CFOs who know on some level, some visceral level, there must be a better way to do this, right? And then who are open to collaborating on the process of finding that better way. But outside of that, Bruce, I can't think of anything that I would have touched on other than, who is it that we'd love to have a chat with.
Scott, thank you so much. We've gone way over, and it's not that you were talking and not saying anything. You were talking and saying a great deal, and I appreciate it, and I'm sure our viewers do. So thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate it.
I'm Bruce Hurwitz. Thank you for watching. And as always, stay focused on success.